The afternoon sun cast long shadows across our quiet suburban street as I pulled into the driveway, my mind already shifting from the chaos of the emergency room to the comfort of home. After a brutal 12-hour shift at County General, all I wanted was to hear my daughter Emma's laughter and feel her small arms wrap around my neck in that fierce hug she always saved for when I came home. I'm Dr. Marcus Webb, a trauma surgeon, though most days I introduce myself simply as Emma's dad. That's the title I'm proudest of. Being a single father wasn't something I'd planned when my wife Sarah passed away from cancer 3 years ago, but Emma and I had found our rhythm. We were a team, just the two of us against the world. As I walked through the front door, I expected to find Emma in her usual spot, cross-legged on the living room floor, surrounded by her beloved art supplies, probably working on another one of her imaginative drawings. Instead, I found Mrs. Chun from next door sitting on my couch, her face pale and drawn, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "Marcus," she said, her voice breaking, "there's been an accident. Emma is at Memorial Hospital." The world tilted. My medical training should have kicked in, should have made me calm and analytical, but this was my daughter, my Emma. The drive to Memorial Hospital was a blur of red lights. I barely remember stopping for, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. When I burst through the emergency department doors, I was immediately recognized by the staff. Dr. Webb, the attending physician, Dr. Patricia Morrison, approached me with that careful, measured walk that doctors use when delivering bad news. "Emma's stable, but she's been shot." Shot. The word didn't make sense. We lived in Meadowbrook Estates, one of the safest neighborhoods in the county. There were no gangs here, no drive-by shootings. Just manicured lawns, identical mailboxes, and an overzealous HOA that sent violation notices if your grass grew a quarter-inch too long. She was riding her bike on the sidewalk. Dr. Morrison continued, guiding me toward the pediatric wing. Apparently, she veered slightly onto someone's lawn, just the corner of it, and the homeowner came out and fired a warning shot. Except it wasn't a warning. The bullet hit Emma in the shoulder. My legs nearly gave out. Someone had shot my 8-year-old daughter for touching their lawn. As a surgeon, I'd seen the worst of humanity's capacity for violence. Gunshot wounds, stabbings, brutal assaults. But this was my baby girl. When I finally saw her, lying in that hospital bed with tubes and monitors attached to her small body, her shoulder heavily bandaged, something fundamental broke inside me. Her eyes were closed, her face peaceful thanks to the pain medication, but I could see the tear tracks on her cheeks. She'd been crying. My brave little girl, who never cried, even when she fell off the monkey bars last year and broke her wrist, had been crying. I pulled a chair close to her bedside and took her uninjured hand in mine, careful not to disturb the foreline. "I'm here, sweetheart," I whispered. "Daddy's here now. You're safe." Her eyes fluttered open, still clouded with medication. "Daddy? I'm sorry. I didn't mean to ride on the grass." The lady was so angry. "Sho, baby. This isn't your fault. None of this is your fault." I kissed her forehead, tasting the salt of my own tears. As Emma drifted back to sleep, a police officer entered the room. Detective Sarah Reeves introduced herself with a compassionate nod. "Dr. Webb, I need to ask you some questions about what happened. The woman who shot your daughter is Margaret Hutchinson. She's the HOA president of Meadowbrook Estates." Margaret Hutchinson. I knew exactly who she was. Everyone in the neighborhood did. She was the woman who'd sent us 17 violation notices in the past year, for everything from Emma's chalk drawings on our driveway to our trash cans being visible from the street for 20 minutes past the allowed time. She'd threatened to fine us, to put liens on our house, to make our lives miserable until we learned to respect community standards. But shooting a child? Even for Margaret, this seemed unthinkable. She claims it was self-defense, Detective Reeves said, her voice tight, with barely controlled anger. Says she felt threatened when Emma trespassed on her property. I looked at my daughter, this tiny girl who loved butterflies and painted rainbows, who still slept with the stuffed elephant her mother had given her before she died, who'd never hurt anyone in her entire life. Threatened? Margaret Hutchinson had felt threatened by my 8-year-old daughter. I want to press charges, I said, my voice cold and steady. I want her prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Detective Reeves nodded. We've already arrested her. She's being held without bail. Dr. Webb, I have to tell you, in my 15 years on the force, I've never seen anything like this. The bullet wound, the trajectory, the distance, this wasn't a warning shot gone wrong. Based on the evidence, she aimed at your daughter. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and terrible. Someone had deliberately shot my child. Not in a moment of panic, not in confusion, but with intention. Because Emma's bike tire had touched the sacred grass of 47 Willow Lane. Margaret Hutchinson had ruled Meadowbrook Estates with an iron fist for 7 years. I learned more about her in the days following the shooting than I'd ever cared to know before. Neighbors came forward with stories, some delivered to my doorstep with casseroles and flowers, others shared in hushed whispers at the hospital. Mrs. Chun, who'd been watching Emma that day, while I worked, filled in the details I couldn't bear to imagine. Emma was just being a child, she told me, her hands shaking as she poured tea in my kitchen a week after the shooting. She was riding her bike, laughing, so happy. She loved that bike, Marcus. The pink one with the streamers you got her for her birthday. I nodded, unable to speak. That bike was. Margaret came storming out of her house like a woman possessed. Mrs. Chun continued. She was screaming about property values and disrespect. Emma stopped immediately, apologized. You've raised her to be so polite, Marcus. But Margaret just kept screaming. Then she went back inside, and I thought that was the end of it. But she came back out with that gun. Did Emma try to run? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. She froze. She was terrified. She just stood there with her hands up, like she'd seen police do on TV, and she said, I'm sorry, I won't do it again. And then Margaret fired. The image haunted me. My daughter, hands raised in surrender, apologizing for being a child, for making a mistake that any child would make. And Margaret, consumed by her obsession with rules and property lines and control, had seen fit to respond with violence. As more neighbors came forward, a picture emerged of a woman who'd become increasingly unhinged over the years. The HOA had started as a typical community organization, organizing block parties, maintaining common areas, establishing reasonable guidelines for keeping the neighborhood pleasant. But under Margaret's leadership, it had transformed into something else entirely. James Martinez, who lived 3 houses down, told me about the time Margaret had his car towed from his own driveway because it was an unapproved color according to some obscure clause in the HOA bylaws. The car was burgundy. The approved colors were apparently limited to black, white, silver, or navy blue. The Kowalski family had been fined $5,000 because their daughter's playground equipment was 6 inches taller than the height restriction Margaret had unilaterally imposed. When they protested, Margaret had placed a lien on their home. Even the Gardens, an elderly couple who'd lived in Meadowbrook for 30 years, had been subjected to Margaret's tyranny. She tried to force them to remove their vegetable garden because agricultural activities weren't permitted in residential yards. Never mind that half the neighborhood had tomato plants, Margaret had decided to make an example of them. But it was Lisa Reynolds, a lawyer who lived on Oak Street, who gave me the most chilling insight. I've been documenting Margaret's behavior for 2 years, she told me, spreading a thick folder across my dining room table. Complaints, violations, notices, threats. Marcus, she's been escalating. The language in these letters has become increasingly hostile, increasingly threatening. I was planning to present this to the state HOA oversight board. But then she gestured helplessly toward the stairs, where Emma was resting in her room. I flipped through the documents, my stomach churning. Margaret hadn't just been enforcing rules, she'd been waging war against her own neighbors. Letters threatening lawsuits, eviction, financial ruin. All over Grass Height, paint colors, where people park their cars. She sent this to the Harrisons last month. Lisa said, pulling out a particularly vicious letter. They just brought home their newborn twins, and their lawn went unmowed for 2 weeks. Margaret threatened to take action to protect the community from their negligence and disrespect. I thought it was just her usual bluster, but now, we knew what Margaret's action looked like. It looked like my daughter in a hospital bed, traumatized and wounded, asking me if she was a bad girl for riding her bike on grass. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks after the shooting. Emma was home by then, her shoulder healing physically, though the nightmares plagued her every night. She'd wake up screaming, reliving the moment over and over. I'd hold her, rock her, promise her that she was safe, that I'd never let anything hurt her again. But we both knew those were empty promises. I hadn't protected her when it mattered most. Margaret appeared in court wearing a pristine suit, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her expression one of cold disdain rather than remorse. When the judge read the charges, assault with a deadly weapon on a minor, reckless endangerment, unlawful discharge of a firearm, she stood ramrod straight, showing no emotion whatsoever. Her lawyer, a slick corporate attorney named Thornton, immediately launched into a defense strategy that made my blood boil. Your Honor, Mrs. Hutchinson is a pillar of this community. She served as HOA president for 7 years, maintaining property values and ensuring the safety and standards of Meadowbrook Estates. On the day in question, she witnessed what she reasonably believed to be a trespassing incident and acted to defend her property, as is her right under state law. She shot a child. I said loudly, unable to contain myself, an 8-year-old child. The judge gavelled for order. Dr. Webb, I understand your emotion, but please let the proceedings continue. As the case progressed, I threw myself into understanding not just what had happened, but why. How does someone become so consumed with power and control that they'd harm a child? I needed answers, not just for the legal case, but for my own sanity. It was Detective Reeves who first uncovered Margaret's history. She called me 2 weeks before the trial, her voice grave. Dr. Webb, I think you should come down to the station. There's something you need to see. In a small conference room, she laid out a timeline that stretched back decades. Margaret Hutchinson hadn't always been the terror of Meadowbrook Estates. 25 years ago, she'd been Margaret Chun, no relation to my neighbor Mrs. Chun, a young mother living in a rough part of the city. She had a daughter, Detective Reeves explained, sliding a photograph across the table. Emily. She was 9 years old when she was killed in a drive-by shooting. Wrong place, wrong time. Margaret had stepped inside a convenience store for just a minute, told Emily to wait outside. When she came back out, her daughter was gone. I stared at the photograph of a smiling little girl with dark hair and bright eyes. She looked not unlike Emma. After Emily's death, Margaret's husband left her. She had a breakdown, spent time in a psychiatric facility. When she got out, she changed her last name, moved across the country, and eventually settled here in Meadowbrook. She never remarried, never had other children. She poured everything into control, into creating a community where nothing bad could ever happen, where everything was ordered and perfect and safe. The irony was devastating. Margaret had lost her daughter to senseless violence, and in her obsession with preventing chaos, with controlling every aspect of her environment, she'd perpetrated the very thing she'd been running from. She'd become what she feared most, but knowing her history didn't excuse what she'd done. If anything, it made it worse. She knew the pain of losing a child, of having your world shattered by violence, and yet she'd inflicted that same terror on my family. The trial began on a cold Monday in October. The courthouse was packed with neighbors, reporters, and curious onlookers. Emma sat beside me in her best dress, the one Sarah had bought her before she got too sick to shop. Emma had insisted on coming, on testifying if needed, though my lawyer had assured me we'd do everything possible to spare her that trauma. The prosecution's case was damning. They presented the forensics evidence showing the bullet's trajectory, a deliberate aim, not a warning shot. They called Mrs. Chun, who testified tearfully about what she'd witnessed. They brought in ballistics experts, psychologists, even other HOA board members who testified about Margaret's increasingly erratic behavior. But it was the video that changed everything. Thornton, Margaret's attorney, had been confident throughout the trial. He maintained that Margaret had acted in self-defense, that she'd been frightened by a trespasser. But on the third day of trial, the prosecution revealed evidence they'd been holding back, security camera footage from across the street. The Hendersons, who lived directly opposite Margaret's house, had recently installed a comprehensive security system after a series of package thefts in the neighborhood. Their cameras captured everything. The courtroom fell silent as the video played. There was Emma riding her bike, streamers trailing behind her, the pure joy of childhood motion evident even in the grainy footage. Her front will touch Margaret's grass, barely just the edge, and she immediately course-corrected, steering back onto the sidewalk. She'd already moved past Margaret's house when Margaret emerged. The video showed Margaret walking purposefully, not in fear, not in panic, back into her house. She was gone for 43 seconds. When she returned, she had the gun. Emma had stopped by then, apparently responding to Margaret's earlier shouts. The little girl stood at the edge of the property line, her bike beside her, her hands visible and empty. There was no threat, no aggression, no reason for fear. And then Margaret raised the gun and fired. The sound of the gunshot on the video made Emma flinch against me. I wrapped my arm around her, pulling her close. Several jurors were crying. The video continued, showing Emma fall, showing Mrs. Chen run screaming from her front porch, showing Margaret standing there, gun still in hand, watching the chaos she created with an expression that looked less like shock and more like satisfaction. Thornton had no response. The self-defense claim evaporated like morning mist. This wasn't a frightened homeowner protecting herself. This was a calculated act of violence against a child. When it was the defense's turn, Thornton tried to paint Margaret as mentally ill, someone who'd snapped under the pressure of her past trauma. They brought in psychiatrists who testified about PTSD, about how the loss of her daughter had affected her mental state, about how she'd been triggered by seeing another little girl on her property. I listened to it all, feeling my anger build. Yes, Margaret had suffered. Yes, she'd experienced unimaginable loss. But so had I. Sarah's death had nearly destroyed me. There were nights in those first months after she passed when I wasn't sure I could go on, when the weight of grief and single parenthood felt too heavy to bear. But I hadn't hurt anyone. I hadn't let my pain become an excuse for violence. Despite our best efforts, the defense called Emma to testify. My lawyer objected vehemently, arguing that forcing an 8-year-old shooting victim to face her attacker was cruel and unnecessary. But the judge, while sympathetic, ruled that Emma's testimony was relevant to establishing Margaret's state of mind and intent. The night before Emma was scheduled to take the stand, she couldn't sleep. I found her at 2 a.m., sitting on her bed, her stuffed elephant clutched to her chest. "Daddy, what if I say something wrong?" she asked, her voice small. "What if I mess up and the bad lady doesn't go to jail?" I sat beside her, pulling her into my lap like I used to when she was smaller. "Emma, listen to me. All you have to do is tell the truth. Tell them exactly what happened, exactly what you remember. That's all anyone expects from you." "I'm scared of her," Emma whispered. "What if she has another gun?" The thought that my daughter lived with that fear, that she couldn't even feel safe in a courtroom surrounded by police and security, broke something in me all over again. She doesn't have a gun. She's in custody, and there are guards everywhere. She can't hurt you. I promise. Baby, she can't hurt you. But Emma shook her head against my chest. "She already did hurt me, Daddy. She hurt me, and she didn't even care. Why did she hate me so much? What did I do that was so bad?" How do you explain to a child that some people are broken in ways that have nothing to do with her? That Margaret's violence wasn't about Emma at all, but about demons and grief and control that had festered for decades? "You didn't do anything bad," I said firmly. "Not one single thing. What happened to you is not your fault. Do you understand me? You are perfect and wonderful, and you did nothing to deserve this." The next morning, Emma walked into that courtroom with a courage that awed me. She wore the purple dress her mother had loved, and she'd asked me to braid her hair the way Sarah used to. As she approached the witness stand, she looked so small, so fragile, yet somehow unbreakable. The prosecutor, Julia Henderson, approached gently. Emma, can you tell us what happened on the day you got hurt? Emma's voice was quiet, but clear. I was riding my bike. Mrs. Chun was watching me because Daddy was at work. He's a doctor and he saves people. Several jurors smiled softly at that. I was going really fast because I like to feel the wind, Emma continued. And I wasn't paying attention, and my bike went onto a lady's grass. Just a little bit. As soon as I realized, I moved back onto the sidewalk. What happened then? The lady came out of her house. She was yelling at me. She said I was a menace and I was ruining everything. Emma's voice wavered. I said I was sorry. I said it was an accident, but she kept yelling. Did you feel scared? Yes. She was really angry. Her face was all red and she was shaking. I thought maybe I should go home, but I was scared if I moved, she'd get even madder. What happened next, Emma? She went back inside. I thought maybe she was done being mad, but then she came back out and she had a gun. Emma's hand went unconsciously to her shoulder, where the scar from the bullet wound was still healing. I put my hands up like I saw on TV. I thought if she could see I didn't have anything, if she could see I wasn't dangerous, she wouldn't be scared anymore. Were you scared? Emma nodded, tears starting to stream down her face. I was so scared. I thought she was going to kill me. I thought I was going to die and Daddy would come home, and I wouldn't be there, and he'd be all alone, because Mommy's already gone, and I didn't want Daddy to be all alone. I was crying openly now, not caring who saw. Half the courtroom was crying with me. I said I was sorry again. Emma continued through her tears. I said I wouldn't do it again. I promised I'd be more careful. And then she pointed the gun at me, and I heard the bang, and it hurt so bad. Daddy, it hurt so bad, and I couldn't breathe, and I thought I was dying. Julia Henderson gave Emma a moment to compose herself. Emma, you're being very brave. Just one more question. When the lady shot you, did you feel like she was trying to scare you, or did you feel like she was trying to hurt you? Emma looked directly at Margaret for the first time. Margaret stared back, her face still impassive, showing no remorse, no empathy, nothing but cold indifference. She wanted to hurt me, Emma said quietly. I could see it in her eyes. She was happy when I fell down. She thought I deserved it. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned, the forewoman's expression told me everything I needed to know before she even spoke. On the charge of assault with a deadly weapon on a minor, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of reckless endangerment, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of unlawful discharge of a firearm, we find the defendant guilty. Margaret showed no reaction. Even as the judge sentenced her to 15 years in prison with no possibility of parole for the first 10 years, she stood silent and unmoved. No tears, no apologies, no acknowledgement of the pain she'd caused. As the bailiffs led her away, she turned and looked directly at me. And in that moment, I saw something I hadn't expected, recognition, not of me as Emma's father, but of me as something else, someone else. It wasn't until later that evening, after the news crews had dispersed and the neighbors had finally left us alone, that I understood what I'd seen in her eyes. Detective Reeves came by my house, this time as a friend rather than an investigator. I did some more digging, she said, accepting the coffee I offered, about Margaret's background. Marcus, did you ever serve in the military? The question caught me off guard. Yes, I was an army medic. Did 2 tours in Afghanistan before I went to medical school. Why? She pulled out her phone, showing me a photo. It was grainy, clearly scanned from an old newspaper. The headline read, "Local medic saves child in combat zone rescue." The photo showed a younger version of me, in uniform, cradling a small Afghan girl who'd been caught in crossfire. The story detailed how I'd run into an active firefight to reach her, how I'd performed emergency surgery under fire, how I'd stayed with her through a 12-hour medevac to make sure she survived. You got a Bronze Star for that, Reeves said, for valor under fire. The story made national news for about a week. I'd forgotten about the medal, honestly. It was in a box somewhere with the rest of my military memorabilia. What I remembered was the girl, Zara, and the way she'd held onto my hand even when the pain must have been unbearable. Margaret would have seen this. Reeves continued. The story ran everywhere. Her daughter had been dead for about 3 years at that point. And here you were, this heroic soldier saving a child when her daughter couldn't be saved. The implications settled over me like a shroud. She knew who I was. I think so. Maybe not consciously at first, but when she saw you moving into the neighborhood with Emma, Marcus, in her twisted mind, I think she saw you as having saved the wrong child. You saved some stranger's kid in a war zone, but you couldn't save her Emily. And Emma, being the same age Emily was, being alive when Emily wasn't. It was sick. It was irrational, but it made a terrible kind of sense. She wanted to take from you what had been taken from her. I said, quietly. She wanted me to feel what she felt. Reeves nodded. I can't prove it. There's no evidence she consciously planned this. But the coincidences are too many. Of all the kids in the neighborhood, of all the minor infractions she could have escalated, it was your daughter. It was Emma. I thought about all those violation notices, all the harassment over the past year. It hadn't been random HOA tyranny. It had been targeted. Margaret had been circling, finding excuses to interact with us, to exert power over us, building up to something, and Emma, innocent and unknowing, had provided the final excuse. The revelation should have made me angrier, but instead, I felt a profound sadness. 2 little girls, a generation apart, both victims of violence. One killed by a random bullet from strangers who didn't know she existed. The other shot deliberately by a woman who knew exactly who she was hurting and why. Emma's recovery was slow and painful, both physically and emotionally. The shoulder wound healed, but the nightmares persisted. She was terrified of loud noises, of unexpected movements, of being outside alone. The little girl who used to ride her bike fearlessly now asked me to hold her hand just to walk to the mailbox. We started therapy, both individual sessions for Emma and family counseling for the 2 of us together. Dr. Sarah Kim, Emma's therapist, was patient and kind, helping Emma process the trauma in age-appropriate ways. She's resilient. Dr. Kim told me after one session, children often are, but she's going to carry this with her. The key is teaching her that what happened doesn't define her, that she's more than the worst thing that's ever happened to her. I held onto those words during the hard nights, when Emma would wake up screaming, when she'd sob in my arms asking why the world was so scary, why bad things happened to people who didn't deserve them. I don't know, baby. I'd tell her honestly. I wish I could explain it. I wish I could promise you that nothing bad will ever happen again. But what I can promise is that I'll always be here. I'll always protect you as much as I possibly can. And I'll always, always love you. Slowly, incrementally, things got better. 3 months after the trial, Emma rode her bike again for the first time, just in our driveway, just for a few minutes, but it was progress. 6 months later, she was back in school full-time, her grades recovering, her friendships mending. The neighborhood rallied around us in ways I hadn't expected. The HOA dissolved itself completely, and residents created a new community association based on kindness rather than rules, on connection rather than control. The Harrisons, whose twins had been the subject of Margaret's last threatening letter, organized a fundraiser for Emma's medical bills and therapy costs. They raised $40,000 in a single weekend. Mrs. Chun baked Emma cookies every week, always in the shape of butterflies because she knew they were Emma's favorite. The Kowalskis donated their daughter's old playground equipment to our backyard so Emma would have a safe place to play. Lisa Reynolds, the lawyer who'd been documenting Margaret's abuses, set up a scholarship fund in Sarah's name for children who'd experienced trauma. Our street, which had been defined by fear and conformity under Margaret's rule, transformed into a real community. People talked to each other, helped each other, cared for each other's children. And Emma, my brave, beautiful Emma, learned to smile again. A year after the shooting, I received a letter from Margaret. It had been forwarded through her attorney, and I almost threw it away without reading it. but something curiosity, maybe, or a need for closure made me open it. The letter was brief. Dr. Webb, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. What I did was unforgivable. I saw the news stories about your military service. I saw what you did in Afghanistan. You saved that little girl when no one could save mine. For years, I've been angry at a world that lets children die, that takes innocence and destroys it for no reason. But you're right. I became the thing I hated most. I became the senseless violence. I became the person who destroyed a child's innocence. Your Emma is alive. She gets to grow up, fall in love, have dreams and adventures, and all the things my Emily never got. Part of me hates you for that, even now. But a bigger part of me is glad. At least you saved one of them. At least you tried. I'm sorry. Those words are inadequate, but they're all I have. Margaret, I read the letter 3 times, trying to find anger in my heart, trying to summon the rage that had sustained me through the trial. But all I felt was emptiness and a strange, unwelcome pity. I showed the letter to Dr. Kim during one of our family sessions. Do you think she means it? I asked. Dr. Kim considered the question carefully. I think she means it as much as she's capable of meaning anything. Trauma and grief broke something fundamental in her. This letter shows some awareness, some remorse, but it's still very much about her pain, her loss. True remorse would focus entirely on Emma and the harm done to her. Should I show this to Emma? Not yet. Maybe not ever. Emma doesn't need to carry the burden of her attacker's pain. That's not her responsibility to heal or understand. I put the letter in a drawer, unsure what to do with it. Forgiveness felt impossible and also irrelevant. Margaret would serve her time. Emma would continue her healing. Our lives would move forward, and Margaret's guilt, or lack thereof, didn't change that trajectory. What did change things was Emma herself. One evening, about 18 months after the shooting, she came to me with a drawing. She'd been doing art therapy with Dr. Kim, using creativity to process her trauma. The drawing showed 2 little girls, one clearly Emma, the other I assumed was meant to be Margaret's daughter, Emily. They were holding hands, surrounded by butterflies and flowers. At the top, in Emma's careful handwriting, it said, "Everyone deserves to be safe and loved." Dr. Kim said that the lady who hurt me was hurt too, Emma explained. She said sometimes when people are really, really sad and scared, they do bad things. It doesn't make the bad things okay, but it helps me understand why. I pulled Emma into my lap. You're very wise, you know that? Dr. Kim says, I'm healing. She says healing doesn't mean forgetting or saying what happened was okay. It means learning to carry it without letting it make me mean or scared forever. My 8-year-old daughter was teaching me lessons about resilience and forgiveness that I, with all my education and experience, had failed to learn. Over the following months, Emma became passionate about helping other children who'd experienced trauma. She started a project at school collecting art supplies for kids in hospitals. She wrote letters to children in war zones, sending them drawings and messages of hope. She asked me to take her to volunteer at the children's shelter where kids who'd witnessed domestic violence stayed temporarily. I know what it's like to be scared, she told me when I asked why this was so important to her. I want them to know they're not alone. I want them to know it gets better. Watching her transform her pain into purpose was the most beautiful and heartbreaking thing I'd ever witnessed. She was becoming someone Sarah would have been so proud of, someone I was already so proud of I could barely contain it. On the 2nd anniversary of the shooting, we did something we'd never done before. We visited the site where it happened. Emma had asked to go, said she needed to make peace with it, a phrase I'm sure she'd picked up from therapy. We stood on the sidewalk in front of what used to be Margaret's house. New owners had moved in, a young couple with a baby. The lawn that had been Margaret's obsession was now cheerfully cluttered with a kiddie pool and plastic toys. I used to have nightmares about this place, Emma said, holding my hand. But it's just a house. Just grass and bricks. It doesn't have power over me anymore. She knelt down and placed a small bouquet of flowers on the edge of the lawn. Not for Margaret, she explained, But for Emily, the little girl who died so long ago and whose death had set all of this in motion, she didn't get to grow up. Emma said, quietly, "That's sad. I wish someone could have saved her like Daddy saved that girl in Afghanistan. I wish she'd gotten to ride bikes and draw pictures and just be a kid." As we walked back home, Emma's hand in mine, I realized that she'd done something I couldn't do. She'd found a way to hold both truth and compassion simultaneously. She understood that what Margaret did was wrong, unforgivable even, while also understanding that pain and trauma can break people in terrible ways. That night, I wrote my own letter to Margaret. I didn't mail it. I wasn't sure I ever would. But I needed to write it, needed to put words to the complicated feelings her crime had evoked. Margaret, I received your letter. I don't forgive you. I'm not sure I ever will. What you did to my daughter was monstrous, and no amount of explanation or backstory changes that. But I want you to know that Emma is thriving. She's turning her trauma into something beautiful, something that helps others. She's become an advocate for children who've experienced violence. She's learned to carry her scars with grace and courage. You tried to destroy her. You failed. Instead, you revealed just how strong and compassionate and extraordinary she truly is. Your Emily didn't get to grow up. That's a tragedy, and I'm genuinely sorry for your loss. But attempting to take my daughter from me, trying to make me feel your pain, didn't honor Emily's memory. It stained it. If you truly want to make amends, if you truly feel remorse, then spend your time in prison thinking about how you can prevent other people from walking the path you walked. Warn them about where rage and control and obsession lead. Be the cautionary tale that might save someone else from becoming what you became. That's the only redemption available to you now. Marcus, Emma's story is not just about one child's resilience or one woman's descent into violence. It's about the invisible wounds we all carry and the choices we make about how to carry them. If you're reading this and you've experienced loss, trauma, or unbearable pain, I want you to know your suffering is real and it matters. But it doesn't have to define your future. It doesn't have to transform you into someone who perpetuates the cycle of harm. Seek help. Therapy isn't weakness, it's courage. It's choosing to process your pain rather than letting it poison you from the inside out. It took me months after Sarah's death to finally reach out to a counselor. I wish I'd done it sooner. Choose connection over control. Margaret's obsession with rules and order was really an attempt to control chaos to prevent more loss. But life can't be controlled. Safety doesn't come from perfectly manicured lawns or strict enforcement of regulations. It comes from community, from people caring for each other, from choosing love over fear. If you're struggling with anger, with intrusive thoughts about harming others, please reach out to a mental health professional immediately. There are crisis hotlines 988 in the U.S., therapists who specialize in trauma and rage, and programs designed to help people who recognize they're struggling with violent ideation. Reaching out isn't shameful, it's heroic. It's choosing a different path. For parents, teach your children that they are not responsible for others' violence. Emma struggled with guilt, convinced that if she'd just been more careful, more perfect, this wouldn't have happened. That's not true. What happened to her was not her fault, just as what happened to Margaret's daughter wasn't Margaret's fault. But Margaret's response to that tragedy was her responsibility, just as our responses to our own traumas are our responsibility. For communities, create spaces for healing, not just rules for behavior. The new community association in Meadowbrook focuses on connection, organizing grief support groups, trauma-informed parenting classes, mental health resource fairs. They've created a community garden where neighbors work together, where children play freely, where imperfection is expected and accepted. Support organizations that help trauma survivors, especially children. Donate to art therapy programs, children's hospitals, organizations that provide mental health services to underserved communities. Volunteer at shelters, become a mentor, or simply be present for the struggling people in your own life. Emma is alive. She's healing. She's turning her trauma into purpose, her fear into courage, her victimization into advocacy. But there are thousands of children who aren't as fortunate, who don't have access to therapy or support, who carry their wounds alone. You can help change that. And if you're someone who's lost control, who's let pain twist you into someone you don't recognize, who feels consumed by rage or fear or the need to dominate your environment, it's not too late to choose a different path. It wasn't too late for Margaret to get help before she pulled that trigger, but she didn't seek it. You can make a different choice. The world broke Emma's arm, but it didn't break her spirit. The world took Margaret's daughter, but Margaret chose to let that loss break her humanity. Which will you be? The person who transforms pain into purpose, or the person who lets pain transform them into an agent of harm? Choose wisely. Choose healing. Choose hope. And if you see a child riding their bike, with streamers flying, tires briefly touching your grass, smile and wave, remember that perfection isn't the goal. Life in all its messy, imperfect glory is the goal. Emma taught me that. She's 8 years old, and she's wiser than most adults I know. Be the person she believes the world is full of. Be the person who chooses love over control, connection over rules, healing over revenge. Our children are watching. Let's show them a better way. If you or someone you know is struggling with trauma, grief, or thoughts of harming yourself or others, please reach out. National Suicide Prevention Lifeline 988. Crisis Text Line. Text HOME to 741741. SAMHSA National Helpline. 1-800-662-4357. You are not alone. Help is available. Healing is possible.